workers in the departments of environmental protection, correction, building, sanitation, and others have just done tremendous work. And I want to also commend the teachers and staff from the Department of Education and all of the city employees who are working in our shelters and taking care of their fellow New Yorkers. Deputy Mayor Linda Gibbs, Health Commissioner Tom Farley, and Homeless Services Commissioner Seth Diamond have done a spectacular job leading our efforts in health and human services. There are an awful lot of people who are very vulnerable, and I think this city has done everything it possibly can to ease their concerns and make sure that they remain safe. First, as to our hospitals, we announced this morning Coney Island Hospital is being evacuated. Patients are being discharged or moved to other healthcare facilities. All other public hospitals remain open. Nearly 6,400 people remain in the city's 76 evacuation centers, and I want to thank the more than 2,900 people who are continuing to staff those centers. Anyone affected by Sandy, homeowners, renters, and businesses can apply for federal disaster assistance. If you want to do that, you register at disasterassistance.gov or call the Federal Emergency Management Agency at 1-800-621-3362. That's 1-800-621-3362 for Federal Emergency Management, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The Parks Department has received more than 7,000 reports of downed or damaged trees or limbs. Winds are still high. Trees are very waterlogged from rain. More limbs and whole trees could come down, so I can't repeat this message often enough. Stay away from city parks. They're closed until further notice. And report down trees and limbs to 311, not 911. Please, 911 is just have to remain free for making and receiving emergency calls about life-threatening issues. Street cleaning rules are suspended citywide for tomorrow, Wednesday. City sanitation crews will begin to resume curbside refuse pickup this evening, as well as continue removing storm-blown debris from our streets. However, there will be no recycling collection until further notice. Inspectors for the Department of Buildings are inspecting the crane on West 57th Street and buildings throughout the city that may have been affected by the hurricane. Public schools will remain closed tomorrow, Wednesday. Conditions permitting, some senior centers may be open tomorrow. Otherwise, you should expect that they will be open on Thursday. However, you should check first before heading out to one tomorrow. The State Office of Court Administration reports that criminal courts in our city will be closed tomorrow, except for arraignments and emergency matters. And tomorrow we are again asking city employees to report to work if their office is open and they can get there safely. If their office is closed and you can safely, then you safely can report to a nearby shelter to assist with operations, please do so. We are here to serve the public, and people that come in make a very big difference. Finally, as you know, tomorrow is Halloween. Most streets in the city will be safe tomorrow, but some may not be, and so we encourage children and adults to enjoy Halloween, but use good judgment and be careful, particularly in those areas where there aren't any lights. Hold on to your children's hands because cars might not see the children. Unfortunately, we just cannot spare the manpower from the NYPD and other city agencies to host the annual Greenwich Village Halloween Parade, so we are postponing it to a later date. Sometime next week. We'll work tomorrow and figure out what date makes sense given the resources the city has. We are adding additional police coverage to areas that are without power. Our understanding is that the New York City Marathon will go on as scheduled Sunday. We'll reconfirm that tomorrow morning and give you any more news. So on that note, let me turn the floor over to Kevin Burke, the CEO of Con Ed. Kevin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank Mayor Bloomberg for inviting me today. Hurricane Sandy was the worst storm in Con Edison's history. It was an extraordinary event that's devastated our system and resulted in significant outages to our customers. But we've already begun to restore customers. We're continuing to assess the damage to our system, and our crews are working on pumping out water from many facilities and, in fact, receiving assistance from the FDNY and the city's DEP in that. I'd just like to describe some of the work that we're focusing on, and it falls into different categories. At our East River plant down on 14th Street in the East River, we have a large transmission substation which then feeds 7 distribution substations. Those 7 substations then feed another 10 networks with about 220,000 customers. The transmission lines that went into that substation and came out of that substation were put out of service with the tremendous storm surge. We're working on getting that substation back in service so that we can reconnect the transmission lines, and we expect that to take 3 to 4 days. We also have a number of customers in Manhattan and in Brooklyn where we have an underground networks where we proactively shut down the networks to avoid damage to company equipment and customers' equipment, and I would say that was a successful move. The equipment was not damaged. Feeds a couple of networks in Manhattan and one out in Brighton Beach in the Coney Island area in Brooklyn. In Manhattan, it's about 8,500 customers. In Brooklyn, it's about 36,000 customers. We're working now, pump out the equipment, inspect the equipment, and we believe that tomorrow we're going to start bringing some of the distribution feeders in those areas back into service, and again complete that process in 3 to 4 days. There will be some customers whose basements right now are completely flooded. We can't get in there to do the work on our equipment. They can't get in there to do the work on their equipment. We'll coordinate with those customers, and that work will continue. So we'll have to see how long that takes. With respect to our steam system, with the surge, we lost most of the generation of steam from our generating plants for the steam system. So right now, the steam system is active in Manhattan down to 42nd Street. There is some steam that we're admitting into the pipes south of there, basically to keep the system warm. But basically, customers aren't receiving any support for anything south of 42nd Street. We're still assessing the damage, and we don't have a good time yet for when we're going to get the next major plant back on so that we can start bringing steam back to additional customers. And finally, this was a tremendous storm with respect to our overhead customers in Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Last year with Hurricane Irene, on a company-wide basis, we had about 200,000 customers out of service. This is more than twice that number of customers. Again, we are getting customers back. We had 3 substations in Staten Island that were out of service this morning. We've brought those substations back into service, energized some of the distribution lines. So some of those customers are starting to see service. If there's damage beyond a certain point, we have to repair those damage. We have hundreds of people in from other companies helping us. We're getting another 260 people in tomorrow from as far away as California and North Carolina. And his work in other areas in the country is resolved. More crews will be freed up and be able to come to New York and to continue to help us. And with that, that's pretty much the status of the electric and steam system. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you. The bottom line is that service in some places will come on the next day or so, but you should not expect the vast bulk of those people that do not have service today to get service much before the weekend's a fair estimate. And Con Ed's doing the best they can. They've got to work with what they have in terms of the underground facilities they have to work in and the complexity of this network, and they've got to do it safely. Before we take questions, let me just summarize for our Spanish-speaking audience. Nuestra ciudad está empezado a recuperar del daño de la tormenta Sandy. El servicio de camiones ha empezado en algunas líneas y será gratis por los viajes de mañana. And with that, we will take questions, sir.
Mayor, have the President or Governor Romney expressed any desire to come to the city and inspect the damage or come to part of the recovery?
I talked to the President today, and I talked to his Chief of Staff today, particularly about a trip here. What I pointed out to him is that We'd love to have him, but we've got lots of things to do. I'm not trying to diss him, but I know he had planned a trip to New Jersey, and I said that's fine. It represents the whole region. People understand the storm, and he doesn't have to. He's got a lot of things to do, and I was flattered that he offered to come, but I think the thing for him to do is to go to New Jersey and represent the country. And when I was on a conference call with him earlier, he had all the governors from, I think, North Carolina all the way up to Massachusetts, I guess, was the far north, and some of the mayors. And I think everybody on that call kept saying thank you for service. You know, there was a lot of criticism of FEMA back in the Katrina days, and today you hear nothing but good things about FEMA, and they certainly have been very helpful to us, as has our working with the governor. We've used a handful of National Guard people. Some of them carried fuel up the stairs to the roof of Bellevue Hospital, where the generators and the tanks on the roof and the elevator doesn't work. So I think the coordination between the city, state.
All right. Good evening. Obviously, we've been watching Mayor Bloomberg's press conference, and I want to give a special welcome to our viewers joining us on RNN. Obviously, continuing coverage as we have all morning long of the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. I'm Richard French, and I'm here along with Andrew Whitman, and just a surreal day seeing some of the images as the storm cleared here, and it's a lot to process from what's going on, and we've heard from all officials earlier today. I was on set when we carried press conferences from both governors, Governor Christie, Governor Cuomo, also an earlier conference from Mayor Bloomberg and other officials, and the assessment and just the, I think the clarity coming in about just the looming rebuilding and recovery that lies ahead here in such a daunting process. But there wasn't so much resignation. We're going to make it through it, but it was just the scope of it. I think even if we were prepped for this storm, Andrew, it was just, I think when people saw the images when the daylight broke today, I think it was a lot and very jarring to take in.
It's the kind of thing that you expect to see or we're used to seeing from other places, certainly not in our area. How widespread the devastation is, just how severe the problems are, hearing the stories of the people who became accidental victims of this storm, the people who were sleeping in their beds or walking down the street and stepping foot into the wrong place. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and yet we are starting to see the resilience of the area as people pledge to rebuild and rebound.
Let's get a quick check of weather. Obviously, that's was started this story here. Jeff Denores is joining us at the Weather Center. And Jeff, real briefly here, obviously the worst was behind us last night, the final surge this morning. Still a little bit of rain, though, in the forecast. We need some sunlight here to dry this stuff out here. What are we looking at?
We got a few days before we get that sun. Unfortunately, this area of low pressure, now the remnants of what was once Hurricane Sandy, this is a slow mover. You know, it's positioned right now in central Pennsylvania. It's going to drift to the north, and as it does, it's going to keep throwing moisture back in. And we're seeing bands of rain right now on the eastern shore, continuing to deal with the remnants of Sandy in the form of some light to moderate rainfall. We had some winds earlier today, but the good news is in the last couple hours, the winds have really eased up. And that's a good thing because cleanup efforts out there, we do not need to have any more adversity when it comes to the weather department, which is a good thing. When the low pressure takes a track like this up to the north, does not come back through our area, and therefore as it continues to move way up into Canada, we'll have to deal with cloud cover and a little bit of light rain shower activity, and we're going to have to continue to deal with a little bit in the way of breezy conditions, but no major system behind the initial system, which is really nice in the sense that you don't have to deal with heavy rainfall, and we get to try to dry things out and clear things out. So cloudy, light rain showers tonight and breezy. Temperatures on the cool side, and keep in mind, a lot of people lost power. Power outages are numerous, and therefore as we head into tonight with a chilly night forecasted, a lot of people don't have heat, and as we head into the weekend, if you're one of those areas that does not get power back soon, you may need to take the precautions to maybe find another place to stay this weekend because the overnight lows are only going to get colder from here on out. Andrew and Rich?
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. And I'm just giving everybody a snapshot. Andrew and I usually, we're talking politics or public affairs here, and obviously this is the only thing on the minds, and I would say not just of the Northeast, but the nation right now with everything that's going on. And
campaigns are generally suspended for the most part.
Right. There are obviously a week from today here, people will be finishing voting at this point almost around the country. And it's a real twist here. We're not even talking about the presidential election. Just give you an idea, for the next 60 minutes, we're going to take you live across the region. We have reporters fanned out. We'll get the very latest on where we stand with everything. But But Jeff just mentioned power outages, and that is at the crux of the immediacy of the problem that we're dealing with here. Staggering numbers, really, up and down the eastern seaboard. We're going to focus on our region, though, and let's bring in Amy Rogers right now with the latest numbers as it relates to those power outages. Amy?
Yeah, thanks so much. Like you said, staggering numbers all up and down the East Coast where people are without power. We're looking at millions that may be without power for days on end. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of those numbers of those who have lost power. More than 2.3 million customers in the dark following the storm in the New York area, the majority in New York City and in the Long Island areas. We've seen the images coming in from New Jersey, such a hard-hit area where more than 2.5 million people lost power. Connecticut, more than 500,000. Delaware, seeing a lot of flooding in coastal resort areas and just over 40,000 in the dark. Amazing the weather they saw in Maryland with flooding in Ocean City as well as snow in other parts of the state and nearly 300,000 losing people there, people losing power there with the storm. Now crews of course are working around the clock to try and get these people back with their power, but they have to do that in a safe manner. So of course they're going to try and do that as quickly as possible, but safety is first.
Yeah, and we're hearing days, some projections, Andrew, week, 10 days, sometimes beyond. When you talk about states that have 90%, in the case of New Jersey and Long Island and portions of it, that 90% of customers without power, and they're trying to bring them back, but still, when you figure out what they have to deal with, it's not just the down power lines. I mean, you have substations that were blown out. It's just...
All you have to do is go back to last year in Hurricane Irene, Long Island. There were 5 to 10 days with people in the dark. Connecticut had people 2 weeks, and in some cases beyond 2 weeks without power. So hopefully lessons learned from last year, and we can get the power back on, or the folks can even earlier. Let's go around our region now and begin to get a sense of where we are and how people are beginning to recover. Let's start with Fios One's Brandy Hitt, who's joining us from New York City with the very latest there. Brandy?
The death toll from this superstorm continues to rise and the damage is widespread. At least 39 people have been killed according to the Associated Press, and it could be several days before we know the full extent of the destruction. After Sandy delivered its record-breaking punch, residents in the battered mid-Atlantic states are now faced with flooding, power failures, and the daunting task of cleaning up.
I guess everybody just thought that nothing's going to happen.
The power outages are spread over several states from Virginia to Maine. Almost 10 million residents are in the dark.
I want every agency to lean forward and to make sure that we are getting the resources where they need.
An unprecedented 13-foot storm surge crashed into lower Manhattan, sending a deluge of salt water into New York City's subway system, which also inundated tunnels. One major tunnel took in more than 11 feet of water, pushing cars and stacking them up like toys.
That the MTA last night faced a disaster as devastating as it has ever faced in its history.
The waves even pushed this 700-ton tanker onto a Staten Island street. More than 50 homes were destroyed when 2 fires sparked in the Rockaways. Firefighters rescued dozens of people trapped inside. The storm turned the bustling streets of lower Manhattan into a ghost town. Still, as the day progressed, some curious New Yorkers ventured out to inspect the damage.
We saw the river coming toward us, and it actually looked like something out of a movie.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says recovery and reconstruction will take a while, and he hopes New York will rebuild smarter in anticipation of future severe weather events.
We have an old infrastructure and we have old systems, and that is not a good combination.
More than 8 million people are also without power, and it could be several days before the New York City subway system is fully restored. The New York Stock Exchange will reopen tomorrow. Reporting live in New York City, Brandy Hitt, ABC News. Now back.
And just a reminder of how widespread this storm has been. 35 dead in the U.S. and Canada, to give you an idea of how far-reaching it was. And let's not forget, it killed 60 people in the Caribbean before it moved its way up the East Coast.
All right, Andrew, thank you. Now let's start going around our region. Let's go to Cape May in New Jersey, one of those seaside communities that was really crushed here by Hurricane Sandy. And we'll go to Christy Duffy for the latest there. Christy, set the scene here as to what we're looking at now.
Well, Rich, we're looking at a long road to recovery in this region as people are already digging in deep and trying to get back to a sense of normalcy. And officials here in Cape May and southern New Jersey, where the worst of the weather is behind us, officials want people to know two things, especially now that it's dark out here. One, that we're still in a state of emergency. They want people to stay home, not to go outside or get on the roads. And two, they're not letting people back on the barrier islands or into some of the coastal towns. So if you're worried about a summer home, or if you evacuated the area, they are not letting people back in until further notice due to what officials are calling the devastating impact on this region. Now, some of the things we've seen around town right here in Cape May is the boards coming down off some of the windows, including the hotel we hunkered down in to get through the storm. We see businesses who were devastated, literally digging themselves out of Sandy. The roadways pretty much have remained empty for most of the day here today, even though the weather has settled down. People are making their way out, though, on skateboards and bikes and on foot as they're checking out some of the damage, looking at the residual flood water on the beach and on some of the roadways. They're walking down the beach and looking at the waves, which yesterday were about 20 feet high at some points. That's, of course, calmed down a lot more today. They're snapping pictures on the streets, which are covered with sand piles that are 5 feet high that had to be pushed to the side to clear those roadways by snow plows. Now, officials say it'll definitely be several days more before they can completely clear the roads and get things back up and running here. And of course, power for many in this region will probably be out even longer than that. But everybody already hard at work one day after the storm, trying to return this area to a state of normalcy. In Cape May, I'm Christy Duffy. Back to you guys, Rich, Andrew.
And if you can, Christy, you talked about the surge that you saw there last night, 20 feet. When I know power knocked out of a lot of places. When you got to see firsthand what it looked like today when the sun broke, were you surprised by the devastation? Did you think it was even going to be worse? I know the community is just beginning to get the bearings about how bad it was, but from a firsthand perspective, seeing how enormous that surf was, it came barreling into Cape May. What was your perspective this morning?
Well, Rich, I thought it would be a lot worse, to be honest, because especially as the storm was really over us yesterday evening, the wind was blowing so hard that it was difficult to keep your balance. I had to literally hold on to the railing of the balcony where we were going live from throughout the evening because the wind just began to rip so hard. You could hear it howling extremely loud in the streets here. People's homes were rattling, their Halloween decorations torn off their house, as well as some of the siding and shingles on the roofs. So I expected it to be a lot worse. We did hear from the mayor here in Cape May, and there were no fatalities or serious injuries. So it was surprising that it wasn't worse, but of course, many here are thankful for that, Rich.
All right, thank you very much, Christy. And you know, Andrew, we're going to play a little bit of Governor Christie's press conference, and he described, and we're going to have more of it later, but he described, you know, in touring the devastation, not even being able to find a place where you could land the helicopter. He talked about seeing a rail car on the turnpike. That's a train rail car that was on the turnpike, a house that was sitting on Route 35, I think. And just, he said, you cannot articulate properly up and down. It wasn't just the seaside communities. It was inland, it was north, it was south. The devastation New Jersey faced. Amazingly, the loss of life wasn't even more severe, tragic albeit that it was. And how long it's going to take for this. Now, he said, you know, there'll be time maybe as big as tourism is when you look at the Jersey Shore to maybe rebuild and redevelop in time. But, you know, this is going to take a while. Yesterday was the storm. Today was kind of the assessment and some of the processing. But as he said, we're going to have to rebuild the state here, and that was the governor's own words. It's just hard to put in context the scope of this.
Well, you think about all the different hazards. We had storm surge, wind, rain, inland flooding that's still going on, all these different kinds of problems. And if you think it's bad for people just trying to get around or for the governor to land his helicopter, imagine how arduous it's going to be for utility crews to try to figure out exactly where the power outages are, what lines are down, how to work around those problems.
Think about hubs, Andrew, and you know this, Atlantic City here, literally, they're going to have to rebuild Atlantic City. Newark, 90% of the power out in the city of Newark here. It isn't just those inland, those seaside communities here that, you know, okay, this is everywhere, urban, suburban, communities up and down the Garden State, and it's really, when you see some of the imagery, to process here, again, the scope of a storm that was 1,000 miles in diameter, you understand just the complete damage it wrought.
All right, as we continue our multi-platform coverage here on this special edition of RFL, we'll switch from New Jersey to Long Island. FiOS 1's Jody Goldberg is live in Island Park, Long Island. Jody, what's the situation there?
Good evening to you. We are in Island Park, and right now there's a light drizzle, except compared to last night, we will take it because this time yesterday there was a heavy wind. The ocean was way over the boardwalk at this time, and we were literally watching the water go right down the street on National where we were staying at the Alegria, and we were watching the boardwalk just have soaked, inundated with the ocean water, and we were seeing surfboards, buoys, everything from underneath just washing out. And now today is the aftermath, and as you were saying earlier, there is just a major recovery from here moving forward because everything is just so devastated and damaged. And so now with me I have Maureen, someone who came down from Valley Stream earlier today to visit one of her friend's house, and she said that, you know, there's no way to really understand the damage unless you see it for yourself. And so just come on over here and just tell me a little bit about how you can explain it for someone who didn't get the opportunity to see just how terrible.
Oh, well, you know, coming down here to see my friend Shelley, I never, ever thought I would see anything like this. No matter what they say to you on the weather, you don't think it's going to be as bad. But when I came down here and saw, I think it's K&K, who houses all these yachts and boats, and to see them thrown like little toys all over the neighborhood, could you imagine waking up to this in the morning? I can't. There was a man that came down hysterical crying because his house is like covered in boats, and I don't blame him. I went to see my friend Helen in Oceanside, and her house up to her first floor, her whole basement flooded. Now, who thought that this would happen? Not I.
And you know, thank you so much, Maureen. A lot of people didn't think this would happen, and I was in Long Beach yesterday covering this story throughout the whole week, and we were talking to people who weren't taking it very seriously. There was a mandatory evacuation in place, and there were so many people on the boardwalk who just said they were going to ride this one out simply because they just stayed there for Hurricane Irene. And so now what we have is just simply destruction all over.
Just to give an idea here, Jody, real quickly, you were with our satellite truck along with some of our crew, and the surge happened so fast, as I understand it, you literally, Jody, and others had to seek and go to higher ground at the hotel. It almost became an island, power completely shut down. It went from a very difficult situation to an extremely dangerous one, and that's just how fast the surge was yesterday. And obviously it gives an idea of the devastation that we saw obviously on the in that neck of the woods, right?
And that's what it was. I don't know if you saw the van drive up next to me just before, except that gentleman was telling me that that was his boat, and many people have been driving around all day today trying to find their boats, and they're not in the water, and they're not anywhere near the bay. They are on people's properties. I don't know if you could see, if we just take a quick look right over here to my left, there are boats on people's lawns, in people's garages, and that's not what you want to wake up to see. Imagine leaving and evacuating and just coming home to this sad, sad, horrible sight. And so this is what we are left with, and this is what we have to pick up.
Okay,
so
Jody, and that's a perfect segue for us to bring in our next guest. Thank you very much, Jody. Check back later with you. Elizabeth Flagler, she joins us, and she's with LIPA, Long Island Power Authority. And Elizabeth, thank you for a few minutes here. We've given some numbers before, but to put in context here, what percentage of Long Islanders do not have power tonight?
We're still approximately about 90% of our service territory has been affected by Sandy. This was an unprecedented, devastating storm for Long Island.
I got to imagine here, with so much standing water still, so many obviously power lines down, the dangers of the projections I've been hearing between 7 to 10 days, some people even using 2 weeks. Is that a fair frame of reference?
Yes, it is, and we do encourage our customers to be patient. We do have approximately 1,000 crews out working. They've been out since 7 o'clock this morning, assessing damage and beginning to restore the backbone of the electric system.
we've heard some of the challenges is usually there's almost a reciprocity system. If a state is devastated by a natural disaster, restoration of power crews come from other states. But because so many states up and down the eastern seaboard were affected, there is additional help coming, but not as much as typically we would have assumed, right?
That's correct. We have asked for over 3,000 additional crew on top of what we have now, and as other utilities assess their damage and get moving on what they're doing, they'll be able to release some to us. So we'll be receiving more during the week.
Elizabeth, do you know how far along you are in the assessment process so far? Do you know how much of the island your crews have been able to get to determine what's causing the outages?
I don't have a particular number. I do know that they're working on restoring the high voltage transmission lines, which bring the power to the substations, which in turn brings the power to the distribution system, and then out to our customers. But we start with the areas of damage near the critical care facilities, such as hospitals, nursing homes, and pumping stations. That's our first priority.
Can you tell us how far along you are in that process?
Well, we're making progress, and we're going to continue to make it overnight. The crews will be out 16-hour shifts working through the night.
People don't want to hear when people preach patience. Obviously, that's going to be needed here. Can you give the priority? You gave the first one here, getting power to those substations. After that, how do you work the determinations? Which places get service first? Which communities get power back before others?
It's not about communities. It's about the number of outages. Like I said, first it'll be critical care facilities, and then it'll be the largest number of outages first, and then we'll work our way down.
Okay.
Are there any portions of the island you have not been able to get to, or that your crews have not had access to?
We're all over the island. I mean, there are areas, like you said, that are underwater. That have water damage, so that's going to take longer for us to get to. And, there's a lot of trees and pole damage, so it's a slow, grueling process.
Last thing, Elizabeth, in the press conference today, Governor Cuomo, he took direct aim at LIPA, saying with the shoddy record they've had in prior storms that he was going to have oversight specifically of your company here. What was the reaction within LIPA when the governor singled you guys out here in terms of restoration of power and concerns that you guys weren't going to get on it soon enough?
I can tell you that we're working through the night, and we're doing the best we can to restore power safely and efficiently.
Okay. Well, I know you got a lot ahead of you. I appreciate a few minutes. Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. From Long Island, let's take you to New York City, where our own Kim Langle is standing by live. Kim, where are you, and what's going on?
Yeah, good evening, Andrew and Rich. We're right outside Penn Station here on 9th Avenue, and it's completely dead at the moment. No one's going in, no one's coming out, because no trains are going in or coming out. You mentioned Governor Cuomo in his press conference earlier today. He talked about the new reality of wild weather. Those were his words, new reality and wild weather. And he also talked about how those two things don't mix with old infrastructure, and that's exactly what we have here in New York City. Just think about it. During the storm, we saw the Hudson River come into Manhattan as far as 10th Avenue. We saw the East River come into Manhattan as far as 2nd Avenue. That meant that the underground tunnels, the underground subway stations, including NYU Hospital, which was a major problem, had gotten flooded. Now, I gotta think that this is gonna be a major pet project of the governor in the coming months, sort of trying to fix New York City's infrastructure. We heard him at a press conference. Here's a few of what he said, along with the chairman of the MTA.
I think the decision to stop the service, move the trains, and move the buses to safer ground was truly the prudent one. We will have a long-term reconstruction effort here, and that's how we're going to have to start to think about it. There's a long-term recovery and reconstruction. This part of the country doesn't deal with flooding often.
Just to give you an example of what happened with the flooding, as well as the trees coming down, as well as the fact that we have lack of power in almost our entire system. The New York City Transit Authority, there are several tunnels, or tubes as we call them, between Manhattan and Brooklyn that are underwater.
Now, along with the flooding issues and the power outages, trying to get around in New York City is very difficult. The best way, 2 feet, 2 wheels, or 4 wheels in a car, and if you're taking taxi cabs everywhere, it's going to get awfully expensive. Bus service has been restored, but it's limited on a Sunday schedule. New York City is taking up the charge for this. It's free if you want to ride it today and tomorrow. That started at 5 o'clock. But it's very difficult. We talked to people who've been walking around New York City, and I got to tell you, we experienced this ourselves. If you're trying to find a place to eat in New York City, it's very tough. Sometimes you're walking across town. There's no power in Lower Manhattan. If you're hungry, it could be an awfully long walk. Back to you in the studio.
And Kim, just quickly, as they try to get the transit system back up and running, does MTA know how they're going to get their employees where they need to go to get everything up and running?
That's a good question. You know, we haven't even gotten that far when we've talked about this in press conferences because there's just so many questions from what are the estimated timetables, which aren't really clear. You have the MTA, also Port Authority, and I got to say, Port Authority is not doing as good of a job as the MTA at getting the messages out of when these timetables are happening. So to answer your question, no.
All right.
Andrew?
Kim Langle reporting live outside Penn Station in Manhattan. Thanks very much.
Well, let's bring Amy Rogers back in because we're getting some information today, Amy, as it relates to when stuff is coming back with public transportation. We had openings today here, and also we're getting some estimates as how long some of the other stuff is going to take before it's online as well, right?
Exactly. A lot of things beginning to reopen today. Flooding and debris shut those down, as well as bridges, tunnels, roads, all throughout our area. Now, the good news is some of these are beginning to reopen, and here's an update so far. As far as transportation goes, beginning at 5 o'clock tonight, New York City bus service resumed with a Sunday schedule and no fares for riders. Metro North and MTA train service remains shut down indefinitely, and taxis are operating on a regular fare schedule. Now, as for the roadways, the New Jersey Turnpike remains closed. Southbound between exits 10 and 14. Northbound lanes are open, however. The Turnpike is closed between exits 14 and 14C. The Garden State Parkway is now open and moving in both directions, and Connecticut highways have also reopened. Now here's a look at local bridges and tunnels. The Holland and Hugh L. Carey battery tunnels remain closed. However, the Lincoln Tunnel is open. The George Washington and Bayonne bridges have also reopened, as well as all major bridges to Long Island, except those in the Rockaways. Now, JFK, LaGuardia, Newark, and MacArthur airports all remain closed today. Now, JFK is expected to reopen tomorrow, but LaGuardia is likely to remain closed due to extensive damage and flooding on the runways. Now, officials, of course, are encouraging everyone to not go out if you don't have to and to be as safe as possible if you do have to head out on the roads.
All right, Amy, thank you. And it's just suffice to say we can understand LaGuardia being a low-lying area right there.
And we had reports of flooding last night. We saw
Huge
pictures
flooding
coming from JetBlue of feet of water on the runway.
I mean, it was dangerous. But we also know the Tappan Zee Bridge has reopened. But when it comes to subways, we're hearing as many as, it could be as long as a week here, and for some of the obvious reasons. Those substations, the water that flowed into not only knocking out substations, but the tubes, literally underwater. Governor Cuomo went into detail the corrosive elements of cold salt water, warm electrical equipment here. It's just amazing. You know, we were talking about the airports, Andrew. There you go,
That's
LaGuardia.
the flooding from the JetBlue terminal. And think about it, something like 60% of all incoming international flights go through New York or through the region at some point. So we tend to think of it about our own convenience and our own travel plans. It's a major crimp, not just for our region. This has national implications and global implications as well.
Okay, that gives you a brief snapshot as to where we are on the travel side here. It's going to certainly take a while, and as you can tell, this storm was an equal opportunist here. You know, we've just talked about primarily Long Island, New Jersey. Connecticut, 90% households there lost power. You look in the Fairfield area, I understand it's closer to 100%. You talk about, for example, some of the issues here in trying to get around. The Merritt just reopened today, but that also was closed as well. It's amazing.
And for the
scope of this.
For the benefit of our viewers on FiOS 1 Potomac, the Metro service in D.C. is running again as of 2 o'clock this afternoon. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge and Tunnel is reopened. and most things are beginning to get back to normal in the D.C. area.
We're seeing images there from NYU, Langone. As many people know, they not only lost power, they lost backup generator. You had people with acute needs. I'm talking from seniors to even infants that were moved out. Well, it was shut down altogether today, as we learned as well. So it was a dangerous situation that unfolded there. Other area hospitals took them in, but we know other hospitals closed as well today and that were shut down, or that ones that were even going to backup power as well.
We also have people who are in shelters. Mayor Bloomberg announcing earlier that there's still 6,400 New Yorkers in 76 different evacuation centers across New York City. All of those centers have to be manned and staffed, so you've got people who are doing that work. You've got National Guardsmen who are getting into the act in some areas as we see some more of the first responders. This
was the scene from Little Ferry in New Jersey today. The rescue here that happened, and we were on the air late last night. There was literally a levee that broke. Whether it was a natural berm or a ferry, there's still some debate, but most people believe the levee, it broke. 2 floodgates opened, and as a consequence, you had 5 or 6 feet of running water that flowed into low-lying areas, including Little Ferry here, where people had all but a minute to get belongings and get out the door. Literally people getting to the top of mobile homes, etc. The consequences of this, you can just imagine from a firsthand. But amazingly, the amount of rescues that took place here and the people that got out, the police department in Menaki and also the fire department, they were crippled by this when the water came through. But nonetheless, and you're seeing some of the images here that happened, they were, you had people by boat and ferries, They had people by boat here and rescued that were taken, 90-year-old seniors. I mean, look at some of the surreal images here, like an arcade machine just in the middle of the street, stuff that just don't belong in certain places. I mentioned a home sitting in the middle of a road, or for example, a rail car, or that just stuff that doesn't belong, but that's where it was.
Let's get the state of things now in Ewing, New Jersey. 501's Kim Wallace is standing by live for us with the very latest. Kim, what's going on in Ewing?
Well, we've actually moved from Ewing, from the state police headquarters, to a Long Branch. I'm here along Route 35, and let me tell you, as someone who took a tour of the state roadways and many detours, do not go on the roads if you don't have to. There is debris and many road blockages. And one surprising thing is, as we were traveling up the parkway, there was some traffic and we weren't really sure what was going on. It turned out that it was a long line, up to an hour wait to get fuel near Exit 100. The Sunoco was packed. People were also filling up their gas cans as they needed to take the gas home to refill their generators and replenish them, as they have been without power for some people several days, most people around 24 hours. And let's listen to what they had to say.
This is the only game in town.
Is that what it is? Yeah. Do you know where the nearest gas station is besides this?
No, there's none open.
Nothing's open?
There's hundreds of gas stations, none of them are open. So we're hurting.
So what did you get? What did you get this gas for?
My generator.
Getting gas, if that's the least of our worries, then, I don't know, my house is still intact. My family's okay.
That is very true. That's all that important. Everyone's safe. What are you going to use the gas for?
A generator. We were lucky enough to be able to borrow a generator. So, yeah, to keep the house, mainly the refrigerator and television for the kids.
And as you can see, people are doing the best that they can without power. Millions of people without power throughout New Jersey. Governor Christie saying earlier today that he's not sure when power will be restored. But driving along these roads, again, we've seen many utility trucks out. You can't really see behind us, but this road is closed. There are many power lines down, but the utility crews are concentrating on the major roadways. So Governor Christie again saying to avoid the roads if you can. It's not only the flooding that's a problem, it's down trees, it's the power lines that are down. And one thing that many people may not think of is that many of the traffic lights are out, and police can't get to all of these traffic lights. They are at many of the major intersections in this area, but we have seen several accidents that were caused because the lights were out. So that's also something to think of. And obviously just stay safe and stay inside if you can. We're live in Long Branch. Kimberly Wallace, FiOS 1 News. Back to you.
All right, Kimberly, thanks very much. And surprisingly, obviously gas stations here, the ones that are open, are getting long lines. But surprisingly, the price of gas is actually dropping as a result of this.
Well, there have been major threats here that if there was ever going to be price gouging. It would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
The New Jersey governor's office has set up a line for anybody who's suspected of price gouging to call in. But overall, because people haven't been using the gas over the last few days, price is actually down nationwide.
All right. Again, here, frames of reference. You're hearing quite a bit about 1800s. That is how far you have to go back to get an idea as to the devastation that we're seeing of these storms in terms of, just the scope of it. Now, you're seeing pictures here from Breezy Point in Queens. And for any of you who've ever been by there, this is what remains behind. But it all really started where there was a fire. If we have any of, if we could show the earlier, okay, the fire that broke out literally started with 1, 2, 3, then 4 homes, and then 50, and then it went to 50 homes plus. And as a consequence here, you had firefighters. You had the surreal images, Andrew, of firefighters that were rushing to the area. They couldn't get through, but by boat they try to get there. There you see the images from last night here, and it just spiraled into just a horrific scene. But again, the first responders who couldn't get there, the water was up to the wheel wells on these trucks here, but then they ended up getting into literally boats. They were reaching over awnings, saving people here, and it was an amazing rescue, a surreal scene, but unfortunately, as you see, what's left behind here, it's literally just remnants of well excess of 50 homes. This is the scene in Breezy Point. Let's go next to the situation that we've seen in New York City, and many of us thought that this was even going to have a tragic ending. This is the New York City crane. This is on 57th Street, right off of 7th Avenue, I believe. You see it right there. They evacuated 2 to 3 blocks in the surrounding area, even the Peninsula Hotel. They moved more than 900 customers, I think, that were staying there because of fears here that that would have collapsed. Suffice to say, it has not. Mayor Bloomberg said today they believe it's safe, but take a look at some of these images.
That's ground zero. That's the area near One World Trade Center, the underground construction, that the building facade collapse that we saw in Chelsea yesterday. And I think that's from the Lower East Side as the water reaches all the way up to the door handle levels. I mean, this is Brooklyn now. It's just staggering. These are the kinds of photos that we got used to seeing out of Katrina or out of other disasters in other places. You just would never have expected to see that here in the New York City area.
You know, and a lot of people, I think, thought after Irene that we, again, Lower New York would be spared. But, I mean, just look at it. It's like matchbox cars packed on one another here. And you get the idea from this photo. I always thought in particular, just the volume and the velocity of this water that came through. And people talked about that water, you know, began to come in, but then it was like a spigot was turned on at a certain point when the later surge last night came through, and then it just seemed like 6 inches went to 6 feet almost instantaneously. So that just gives you an idea of just what went down there last night.
And the other common element to all these photos, the first responders who are rushing into the middle of all these incredible dangers, risking their own lives for the benefit of everybody else. And hats off to them as they continue this long, arduous process.
You know, another flashpoint for this storm on the Long Island side has been Freeport here, and we've had reporters covering this story since the morning here. And just if you take a look at some of the imagery here as we bring it up at Freeport, it's just been really amazing to process from the storm surge that came in and then the aftermath that went out of it. Let's go to Carolyn Fortino, who's been there today. And Carolyn, some of the images you brought back about things that don't belong where they are, boats in the middle of roads or in houses, set the scene for everybody.
That's right, Rich. We're actually joining you from the Mako Marina on Hudson Avenue here in Freeport. And as you've mentioned, things just do not look the way that they should be. We're actually standing next to the boat yard, and where you would normally see boats sitting on top of cinder blocks and boat cradles, the boat yard is empty because the boats have floated into the middle of the street here. Now, last night, people thought that they were going to be protecting their property by putting their boats on top of these risers and getting them out of the water. And what we're dealing with is during the high tide levels last night, when the water levels were rising to anywhere to between 6 and 11 feet, the boats literally floated off of their risers and they're spilling out into the middle of the street over here on Hudson Avenue. Just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, you have fences that have come down, you have boats just resting on their sides in the middle of the street. Down that way, you have boats that are leaning up against telephone poles. They're wrapped around telephone wires. Let's take a look at this house over here on the corner. You have a boat that's just sitting here in the front lawn, and you want to talk about damage. Their front steps have been completely destroyed. There's debris and flooding all over the house. We actually spoke to the people that lived inside. They mentioned that last night they were watching the storm from their bedrooms, which are at the top level of the house. They said they had their life preservers on, and at one point there were 5 different boats that were knocking into the side of their house all along the perimeter. So it really was just a sight to behold. Things that you normally don't see. Boats floating around these residential areas in the middle of the streets, knocking up against people's houses. Earlier today, you saw plenty of people walking up and down, sort of surveying the damage, seeing what they're coming up against. And now it's really like a ghost town. The power is out. And people have sort of retreated back into their homes, and I think the process now becomes how long it's going to take to sort of rebuild the community, which really they've said they've never seen anything like it. That's the latest from Freeport. I'm Carolyn Fortino. Back over to you guys in the studio.
All right, Carolyn, thank you very much here. And I don't want to pay short shrift. It's hard to cover everything in a storm like this, and we've been going since obviously since before the crack of dawn, and we're going to go through the evening, and then obviously in the days that follow around the clock on this story. But it isn't just Long Island, it isn't just New Jersey, it isn't just New York City. I know you've been following, for example, in Maryland, and not just devastation and flooding here, but fatalities too. And then in Connecticut, we've mentioned before here, a mess. But this goes all the way up, Andrew, through Maine and then into Canada, as you mentioned. It goes all the way down south along the eastern seaboard, all the way to South Carolina. They had blizzards, people, in West Virginia and parts of Virginia today from 1 foot to 2 feet. That's just, again, I was talking to Brian Fitzgerald, one of our meteorologists, and he made a great point about the diameter of this storm here, more than 1,000 miles, tip to tip here. And, you know, forget the path and everything it took here, but the scope of this thing. And as we said, you know, how it didn't play any favorites in terms of where it hit. But I would say, if you had to pick the place that was most devastated end to end, New Jersey, it seemed, took bear almost the majority of the
Well, it got the direct hit of the storm, so you had the maximum winds that came through New Jersey, and you had the biggest impact on several levels, both on the shore and inland. Governor Chris Christie earlier addressed the people of New Jersey and other people by extension on the depths and the extent of the flooding and the damage. Here's some of what he had to say.
I know that many people in our state woke up today to absolute devastation. There are no words to describe what so many New Jerseyans experienced over the last 24 hours and what they will have to contend with over the coming days, weeks, and months. I'll first say to all of you, especially those out there who are facing loss, devastation, and the heartbreaking reality that your home may be gone, we are with you. We have a long road ahead of us, but I have complete confidence we're going to come out of this better and stronger than before. This state is too tough to give in to this type of devastation. And we in the government will be here to work with you to have New Jersey completely recover.
You know, the governor went into detail, and again, I mentioned it because when he was describing, and he hadn't even reached the southernmost portion of the state here, and just what he had witnessed, in the northern portion, as I said, rail cars on a highway and another highway, a house sitting in the middle of it, complete communities changed, you know, literally the landscape. I mean, I know you know this, but I'm not sure our audience, the landscape and topography of our region here will be forever altered by this storm. I mean, the beach erosion that's taken place, you know, we'll process all this later on, but you have no power for 90-some-odd% of New Jersey residents. And I know Long Islanders, you're nodding along with this because the few of you who have power that can watch us can relate, and certainly folks in Connecticut are nodding along. And certainly, I mean, I can speak firsthand in New York. I don't have power like many of you as well don't as well here. It's just the staggering amount of to-do list. And he said, we're really going to have to rebuild. But I would say if there's a saving grace, Andrew, through the advance of science, we knew in meteorology that this was a big storm. And everybody took the due diligence to say, this is real, this is not hyperbole, you need to get out. And most hopefully took that advance warnings of those mandatory evacuations, and they were coordinated. It seems like at different levels, whether it's from the municipalities to the counties to the states to the federal government, there has been a cohesive response, much different certainly than what we saw in Katrina.
Well, that's one of the advantages of, well, first of all, that's one of the advantages of the lessons learned from Katrina. One of the biggest breakdowns that we had following that storm was the lack of cohesion, the lack of unity among federal, state, local, county officials. That was something that was seriously focused on by FEMA and federal officials in the wake of Katrina. You also have better communications abilities. You're able to spread messages on things like Twitter and Facebook and outlets like FiOS One, and a greater focus on it. You also have better forecasting, so you can give people a better sense of where the impact is going to be, where the affected areas are going to be, and so people can be better targeted.
And you know, one of the things that we saw, frankly after 9/11 even, but even after, not just that, but then after Katrina, was we don't have to go through, and I'll use my own words in editorial, it's the stupidity of some of the back and forth about whether or not funds would or would not be provided for communities. We already know from the White House, not only were the states of declaration of emergencies issued, but it was even further expedited above. Governor Christie spoke about, and also Governor Cuomo and other governors involved. Listen, if there's any bureaucracy that's getting in the way, the president said, here's my personal number, you tell me, and I'll cut through it all, and you'll get what you need here. There was no political divisions that we've heard at all here. It's pretty clear that Washington will be there for our region, and there won't have to be any beg, borrowing, and putting out a hat here in hand and asking for funding. There will be resources, at least at first blush, that we are going to be able to try and, as best as can, this will not be a fast recovery, this will not be a fast restoration for power for everyone, but as much as possible, all resources that can be will be made available, including funds, to try and, if not make us whole here, to get us back to as much as we can expect to try and get back on our feet. So I thought that was something significant. It's not going to mitigate everything, but it's good to know that we're not pulling in different directions.
It would be easy for a subject like this to become a political football, especially this close to Election Day. It does not appear as though that's been the case. Obviously, when it comes to future ideas for FEMA and the role of the federal government when it comes to this, that's something for when the politics ramps up again in the days following.
You know, we typically do a public affairs show in politics, and I was on air for a long time today, and we certainly didn't talk about politics yesterday, today, or nor will in the future, but in a week from today, we have a presidential election. You have elections where you're going to decide a senator from New Jersey, from New York, countless other officials, every congressperson, local elections, and oh yes, a president of the United States a week from today, and you have complete areas that can't turn on the lights here. There is a legitimate questions going on as to where we go from here, but I will play a clip when asked, I think an understandable answer here from Governor Christie when asked, what about that looming date in just 7 days? Take a listen to what Governor Christie had to say.
I will tell you, this administration at the moment could give a damn less about Election Day. If you hear the things that I just talked about, and the devastation that's been visited upon this state, I am sure that while the national election is obviously very important, that the people of New Jersey at this moment would really be unhappy with me if they thought for a second I was occupying my time thinking about how I was going to get people to vote a week from today. So I don't give a damn about Election Day. It doesn't matter a lick to me at the moment. I've got much bigger fish to fry than that. So do the people of the state of New Jersey. So Let the politicians who are on the ballot worry about Election Day. It's not my problem. I'm not dealing with it at the moment.
That comment coming as a result of a question. President Obama will be in New Jersey tomorrow. He'll be visiting some of the affected areas. There were some questions, as I believe the governor got a question about whether Mitt Romney should come visit the area. I know that was one of the questions that came out, and also the governor, with unusual for him, praise for President Obama, and he was asked about that as well, and basically saying, you know what, none of this matters. What matters is getting rid of that flood water and getting help to people.
The governor's right. Right now, who the heck cares if you're in New Jersey and your home's underwater, you don't have any prospects for immediately getting your electricity back, you don't know where you're going to be, your business, your job might be washed away as well here. He's got the basic state of the economy that he's got to worry about, and obviously this doesn't just reside with the state of New Jersey, our whole region here dealing with just basic questions that they're staring at. So we have so many questions ahead of us, and it's kind of an hour-to-hour, day-to-day kind of conversation, but we have some huge questions that we're going to have to answer as a region and even as a country here with so many important decisions that lie ahead. But for Andrew Whitman and myself here, I'm going to sign off. Andrew's going to stay with you. Much more coverage here as our coverage continues here on Hurricane Sandy. Please stay with us.